Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I hope you had a great break and that you are ready to engage again on the conversation. I, first of all, would like to thank SERC for giving us the opportunity to be providing a Latin American overview of what is the landscape of AI in a region that data and research shows that is underrepresented. So it's quite important for us, and it's personally very important for me coming from Costa Rica, part of Latin America. So we started thinking about what are the impacts of AI that actually is being produced, the models, let's say, are dominated to different geographies. Right now, currently, the domination is the United States, you have China, and you have Europe. But the deployment of AI, it's been global. So we started to think and reflect, what are those deployments are going to be the same, are going to be perceived the same in the US, in China, in the global South? And if so, do we need to have a better context and a better understanding of the nuances of the social infrastructure of these places to really engage in an ethical way of AI in its whole life cycle? So we believe that cultural, political, and economic factors within a given region, country, or community will shape how we engage with technology, how we shape socio-technical imaginaries, could influence positively or negatively the impacts of each technology. So what is it that we did? I will walk you through what we did, a little bit of how we did it. So the methodology is quite important, but I will try to go to the conclusions, the vulnerabilities that we have found, and then a little bit of what needs to be done. So what we did is to create an ethical assessment of the vulnerabilities of AI in Latin America. So how can the region seize the opportunities? There is a lot of promises regarding AI being able to close gaps, to help us with our structural and historical inequalities. But at the same time, that is possible if we can also mitigate the risk. And we cannot understand how to leverage the opportunities and mitigate the risk if we don't understand our own status, our own landscape, and where is Latin America standing in the global landscape of AI. So very, very briefly, Latin America, it's very diverse, it's very vast, very hard for me to let you know exactly what Latin America is. Just give you two facts. First of all, is one of the most biodiverse regions in the whole world, and we produce a lot of data. Some of you may be working in that area. We produce a lot of data regarding biodiversity. At the same time, Latin America is the most, not one of the most unequal region in the world. So this is very important to keep in mind, because we are going to put on top of that the layer of technology. So how is that Latin America can leverage the opportunities while we have still to catch up with these challenges? Why this is important? Well, for me, it is important because AI, it's already been deployed, and we are actually feeling the positives, impacts of AI, but Latin America, it's also already experiencing the negative impacts of AI in regards of, are we ready for this? Do we have the provisions to mitigate the risk? And the reality is our case studies shows that not too much ready in certain areas. So for example, there is biometric information that has been collected in Argentina during the economic crisis. So people was selling, let's say, their biometric information to WorldCoin, which is a US-based company, without entirely understanding what is it that they are providing, what the company was going to do with this information. Because Latin America provides a lot of data work and micro work, let's say, for data collection and tagging and content moderation. Most of the times, because of structural informality in the labor market in Latin America, most of that work is also informal, sometimes very, very poorly paid in very precarious conditions. But they are part of the supply chain of the AI ecosystem. And I will go back to this because I think when we are talking about ethics in AI, should we think about the bias of the model and the deployment, or we actually think about AI in the life cycle? It is important because Venezuela, it's already using Gen AI to provide propaganda, misinformation, disinformation from the government. But also it's an interesting case because journalism in Venezuela that has been repressed by the authoritarian government of Nicolás Maduro, they have been also using Gen AI to create journalism without the journalists to be threatened by the government. So it is very important. Gen AI was started to produce propaganda for the government, but now also it's an innovative way for the opposition to also provide information. It is important because we are very, very vulnerable to cyber attacks. Fraud and scams and cyber attacks are on the surge in Latin America, and the reality is that we are somehow prepared for some of those, but mostly if they are targeted into our critical infrastructure, which was the case for Costa Rica, they targeted our healthcare system, so sensitive. We need to be prepared for this. And also, and I wanted to point this out in a very nuanced and sensible way, Latin America needs to catch up with a lot of investment. AI is not possible if we don't have the infrastructure that make that possible. That means that Latin America needs to catch up with 5G. Currently, there is telecom operators in Latin America, but there is no deployer of 5G in Latin America. That will mean that Latin America needs to go to do an international bidding, and that bidding usually, if you want competition, will mean that you will have US providers, Europe providers, and China providers. Needless to say that China currently is the global leader in 5G deployment, very competitive. So if Latin America is trapped in a geopolitical battle between the US and China, the reality is that it could be very, very detrimental in how we can catch up with our deployment of 5G. So it is important to provide that perspective. So going back to the ethics and the AI system life cycle, where is Latin America currently in the life cycle? This is the OECD life cycle, just to provide a reference. Latin America right now is engaged in the AI systems, providing low added value inputs. So we provide data collection and processing, content moderation that could be in the loop going back to data collection and processing, and obviously we are full on deployment. But when we are talking about ethics, going back to my point, are we just talking about bias in the systems, in the models? Should we think about the ethics of AI, thinking about the whole supply chain now that it is a hot topic in the conversation? Why? Because maybe we could also think about that Latin America is engaged in the AI system lifecycle through critical minerals, providing the critical minerals that makes AI possible. Should we think that these inputs should be ethical sourced? Do we think that the data workers that are part of the supply chain should be ethically be within ethical dynamics of labor? If they are not, can we say that our model, our system is an ethical AI? So this is just, it is important just to say that Latin America right now has very little participation in the design, planning, and development of the models. We are very engaged on deployment, providing feedback, and there's obviously Latin American talent in all the phases, but we should be more engaged in decision making, in how we design and shape these models to capture the cultural nuances of Latin America, of our own language, of our own culture, and of our own social infrastructure. So how we did this ethical analysis to understand where are our critical vulnerabilities. So Latin America is very broad, vast. We took as a reference the Latin American artificial intelligence index as a reference. What they do is that they just measure the readiness for each country regarding AI. They don't get into AI ethical dynamics or compliances. They just measure where the countries are in regards of readiness. So for our research, we took 2 pioneers, the leading countries in Latin America, which are Chile and Brazil. They are leading the way very much. We have the standards, let's just say the adopters, which are the standard of Latin America. We took Mexico and Costa Rica. And for the explorers, another word to say the countries that needs to catch up. We took El Salvador and Honduras. This is important not only to understand a little bit of the differences between the region, but also to have representation from North Latin America, Central Latin America, and South Latin America. We needed to define which ethical principles are we going to work with to understand the ethical type of dynamics in Latin America. Our countries, and these 6 countries, have signed several declarations, several international agreements. So what we did is that we did a mapping of which agreements are shared by all of these 6 countries. And basically, these 6 countries, Chile, Brazil, Costa Rica, Mexico, El Salvador, and Honduras, the 3 of them have committed to the UNESCO's recommendation on the ethics of AI. This is probably the most ratified agreement in terms of ethics globally. So many countries have signed it. We also took the Santiago Declaration that is based on UNESCO's and the Inter-America Framework on Data Governance and AI, sorry, the typo. Those 2 are based on the UNESCO. So based on these 3 agreements that these 6 countries have signed, we created what are the shared ethical principles that we are going to work with. So we came up, and this is quite important, with 15 ethical principles. Because they were very different. So we came up with the 15 ethical principles that you can share with all those declarations. And after understanding these principles, we went country by country, understanding how each country creates provisions for proportionality. Is it rights-based type of proportionality? Is it risk-based? How is the regional status around proportionality? How is the regional status around security? And for each one of those principles, we provided, if you want to have security, what are the indicators that will guarantee to your population that you will have security in AI? Well, maybe cybersecurity is one of them, so that is one indicator. And then we analyzed all the provisions, metrics, mechanisms that each one of these countries have in order to guarantee these commitments that they have ratified. Because the reality is that ethical commitments sometimes can be very, very vague and sometimes, unfortunately, very aspirational. And there is little monitoring or enforcement control afterwards. So we took 3 benchmarks to provide also inputs to our analysis. The first one was a global benchmarks. We took the Stanford AI Index 2024, a regional benchmark, which is the Latin American AI Index that provides regional metrics around AI. And then in order to provide the ethical base, the UNESCO. We took all reports, paper, literature that we had, and also everything that has to do with regulatory frameworks and any type of provisions. And what we did is a cross-analysis. A cross-analysis for each one of the principles, each one of the indicators, each one of the countries, and a regional status in general. This is through 2 cross-analysis methods. The first one is the cross-tabulation. So just to give you an example here, we're talking about data protection. The sub-indicator will be cybersecurity, and we went through understand what is the regional status, what is the status for each country, what are the metrics that we have for any type of indicator. The other indicator will be automation exposed jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is for gender equality. This is just an example. The research is based on numbers and numbers of tables, because we did that for each one of the 15 principles, for each one of the countries, and for a regional overview. And after that, we said, well, if we think about AI as a system, we should also think about the principles of ethics of AI also as a system, because they actually are intertwined. They relate to each other. So for example, we needed to understand what is the relationship between the principles and what is the impact that each principle has in any other principle, also as part of our cross analysis. So just to give you an example, there are some principles that they be in tension, meaning that if you want to go high with security, you may go a little bit lower in accessibility. So they could get into tension. Or some others that when we have more non-discrimination, probably you will have better gender equality. Or if you have better gender equality, your non-discrimination will actually also go high. And how they impact each other. So again, security and accessibility will have a 3 because they are strongly impacting each other. What we found in the relationship and the cross-impact analysis is that when we are talking about these principles, what is at the core of the conversation, it's human rights. And also what is at the core of the conversation that we need to take into consideration is participation. Participation has a strong impact on how we manage gender equality, because if women are participating, then they will provide a better, strong, and different points of view. If you want to make sure that you have non-discrimination, well, depending on who is at the table, you may improve those numbers. So human rights at the core. Any principle is going down, human rights is going down. It seems obvious, but it's important to measure it. And also participation, multi-stakeholder engagement. So based on those methodologies, we got to 10 conclusions, 10 critical vulnerabilities, and some recommendations. I will go through, because I think I'm short of time, I will go through the critical vulnerabilities very, very briefly. This is what we found. Some of them are not necessarily just for Latin American region, but they are especially critical for the Latin American region. We may have expansion of surveillance and social control. Just to give you an example of this, more than 30 initiatives for facial technology, for facial recognition technologies are in Latin America without necessarily the proper regulation. Proliferation of misinformation, escalation of AI-enabled organized crime. Organized crime is already using AI in Latin America. They have the resources. They are flexible enough to navigate the use of AI, while the government and the police officers, well, they have other type of limitations. So we have these 10 critical vulnerabilities, and then we provided 5 sectors where we think are the priorities of the actions and recommendations. First of all, we need to collaborate and work as a region. If we want to negotiate, we need scale. If we want to enhance and leverage on data, we need to create synergy. If we want to fight organized crime that actually has no borders, well, we need to create a regional synergy around that. Institutional transformation is not enough to do national AI strategies. We need a more comprehensive development vision that it's transversal to AI. Prioritize education, mostly gender equality and urban-rural. This will be more important, very important for Latin America. Industrial policies and investment, 5G and other type of investments. Thank you so much.